for discussion is aggregate demand. Now that's really interesting. Okay, so it's aggregate demand. The short form is AD. All right. So what do you understand by aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is nothing but the total amount of goods demanded in an economy. So it's the total amount of goods, right, demanded in an economy. So that's your aggregate demand in very simple terms, right? Total demand of goods and services demanded in an economy, right? That's your aggregate demand. Now if I say that, then basically I divide this aggregate demand into 4 components, right? So this total amount of goods and services can come from various sectors in an economy, right? So if you have seen my video on circular flow of income, I told you that the entire economy is divided into 4 sectors, right? So it's the household, it's the firms, then it's your government sector, and it's your external sector. Now that is only what is here, comprises these 4 components of aggregate demand. So your household is nothing but your consumption in the economy. So all the expenditure on consumption of goods and services that's done by the households is your consumption expenditure, right? That's the demand. That's the demand from the household sector, right, of all the goods and services. Then it has another component that's called I. Now I is nothing but the private investment done by big industrialists, big business houses, basically private sector investment. Like if I talk of building up of infrastructure, various infrastructures, it could be ports, it could be your offices, it could be some, let's say, flyovers, it could be anything. But this I stands for the private investment. So basically that's from your firm's demand, right? So it's basically private investment from private sector. Now private sector here basically the firms, right? So this is the second sector of the economy, we can say, that is a part of your aggregate demand, right? The third, as we know, is your government, right? So government basically demands goods and services for building up various things: public parks, public hospitals, educational institutions, or roads, street lighting, and various others, right? Then we have the fourth sector, that's the external sector that we talked about in circular flow of income, right? Now external sector is basically dealing with rest of the world, or ROW, and we deal with ROW, or rest of the world, by our exports and imports. So the is nothing but exports minus your imports, right, is what your net exports make up this fourth component. Okay, so net exports, X stands for exports and N for the net. So net exports is nothing but your exports minus your imports. That makes up the fourth sector, or the fourth component of aggregate demand. So I'm just trying to connect the dots of the 4 sectors that we have done in my previous video on circular flow of income. So I talked about the household sector, I talked about the firms, I talked about the government sector, and I talked about the external sector, right? So this household is nothing but your consumption expenditure. The demand, the total aggregate demand for goods and services, that comes from the household through the consumption expenditure. The total demand by the firms, they come from this investment that they do, the private investment, right? The government sector we know is the same, so it's the government sector. The external sector, since it's external, so that's outside the country, and outside the country it's only the exports and the imports of goods and services that we take into consideration, so that's why it's net exports. So this basically depicts or represents your external sector. So are you understanding that how the four sectors of the economy are into the expenditure for the economy that makes up your aggregate demand for the economy? Okay, so this is what it is. Now this is a very important equation that you all must know, you all must understand, that aggregate demand, so the total demand for goods and services in the economy come from these four sectors, or these are the four components of your aggregate demand. All right, okay, now since we have just started aggregate demand, I just want to make it simple, and we will just concentrate on, let's say, a two-sector economy. So how is the aggregate demand in a two-sector economy, right? So in a two-sector economy, basically we are considering only, as I did in the circular flow of income, so I am considering only two sectors, households and firms, and so I'll be considering only two components of aggregate demand: consumption and investment. So I'm repeating it again, this investment is not the investment by the government. For that there's a separate government sector, right, or a government component that we take into consideration. This investment is from the private firms, from the private sector in the economy. Okay, all right. So we have this aggregate demand as a sum of just I, C and I. Right now I'm not considering the other two sectors, just to make it simple, just to start with aggregate demand. Okay, so we say that aggregate demand basically has two components. One is consumption and one is investment. Now consumption is something that is actually related to your income, right? So if I draw a diagram, so I have income on this axis and I have your consumption over here, right? So C, let's say, right? So in consumption, okay, first let me just explain. So what if your income level is 0? So basically what I'm doing is I am trying to set up a relation between consumption and your income, right? So since what's the relation between consumption and income? Okay, so I'm with the first component. What's the relation between consumption and income? Just think about it. So as your income increases, your consumption generally goes up, right? Okay, fair enough. Okay, what if your income is 0? What happens then when your income is 0? What happens then? If your income is 0, then what happens to your consumption? You don't consume? You do, right? You need a survival consumption, right? You need to consume for your survival. So even then you have some consumption, and that consumption is basically what in economics we depict with, let's say, C bar. So that's your consumption level even when your income is 0. So now if I have to plot this on this X and Y axis, how will I do that? So when my income level is 0, even then I have a certain consumption level of C bar, right? So this difference is basically my C bar, correct? So instead of writing it here, I'll write it as this difference, my C bar. Okay, so even when my income level is 0, I consume this much level of good or service. So that's my C bar, right? And after that, as we know that as my income increases, so if my income goes to 1, my consumption also increases. If goes to 2, my consumption increases. So it's an increasing function thereafter, right? So as my income increases, my consumption also increases. So at this level of income, my consumption is this. At this level of income, my consumption is this. At this level of income, my consumption is this. So my consumption is also increasing from here to here to here as my income level is increasing from here to here to here. Do you understand this? So that's your consumption in terms of, that's how your consumption is related to your income. So if your income is increasing, your consumption also increases. However, when your income is 0, then also you consume a part, and that part is denoted by the C bar. Now this C bar can be financed, either you have some savings, so you dis-save, right? So your income is 0, but you had saved earlier, and so you have some money left. So you are financing your consumption through those savings, right? So that's one of the ways. Either you borrow from the bank or from a friend or from anywhere else, right? So you can borrow or you can just dis-save, correct? So that's how you finance this consumption level, your minimum consumption level for survival, right? After that, it's a general increase in your consumption as your income level increases. Okay, one thing I just wanted to say, that as your income increases, your consumption also increases, but your consumption increase in consumption is less than the increase in income, right? So remember that. So if it's not that if your income increases, then the entire increase in income is consumed. I mean, that's not realistic, okay? A part of it is saved by people, okay? So the increase in consumption is less than the increase in income. So if your income increases by 100, then maybe you just consume, let's say 75 rupees of that, okay? Not the entire 100. Realistic situation, I'm telling you. Mathematically or theoretically, we can go up to that extent also, that if your income increases by 100, your consumption also increases by 100. We can say that. But I'm just trying to tell you that realistically that doesn't happen, okay? So it increases by, the consumption increases by less than the increase in income, okay? All right. Okay, then we come to the second component, which is your investment. Now, for simplicity's sake, we are taking investment to be autonomous. Now, what do I mean by that? So, investment being autonomous basically means that if I take income here, I take here, then I have investment out here. So my investment is just parallel to my Y, that's my income, which basically means that my investment is not affected by my income level. That's what I'm assuming, right? So it's like whatever be my level of income, my investment will always be constant, this much, okay? Or I can take whatever amount I want. This is just a hypothetical graph I have drawn. I can take something like here, I can take it here, I can take it here. Whatever be the level of investment is I have chosen, that remains I mean, that's not influenced by my level of income. So whatever be my level of income, my level of investment remains constant. So we are assuming autonomous investment here. All right, now if I just club these two diagrams, right, so I have aggregate demand is equal to C plus I, right, and if I just club these consumption and investment diagram on one graph, what do I get? I get something like this. So that's my income, that's my aggregate demand. Now what I'll show, and I'll have this is, let's say, my consumption level. Okay, so that's my consumption function. So this is my C bar. So that's my, okay, I'll just write for now consumption function, right? And this is my C bar, right? That's 0. And then since I have to add investment as an autonomous component, right, so there would be, I just have to add investment out here, right? So C plus I will give me the total aggregate demand, correct? So it's like, and since it's autonomous, so it's a parallel line, right? So it's just a parallel line. So it's a parallel line like this. So that's my investment. I mean, that's not my investment. My investment is basically this. This difference is my investment, which is autonomous, right? And this line basically gives me my aggregate demand of C plus I. So I have just increased, this is basically, this difference is basically I bar. So my aggregate demand is this. I add this investment, which is autonomous here, this difference. So this line basically is my aggregate demand of C plus I. All right, do you get that? Okay, one more thing, it's like I have talked about this in circular flow of income, is like, you know, whatever is demanded, right, is equal to, so this is basically, right now since I'm just considering two sector economy, so this is my total expenditure, right? So, and I have talked about that, you know, one's expenditure is another's income. So basically this is nothing but my total, let's say, you know, income in the economy also, right? So my total aggregate demand is nothing but the total income in the economy generated in a two sector economy, if I'm just talking about, right? So I can write that Y is equal to your C plus I, right? I can also write this, that your income is equal to your C plus I, since AD is nothing but your total income generated in the economy. Okay, all right, now that's your AD. Now let's come to something that's called aggregate supply. That's your AS, aggregate supply, or AS. Okay, so aggregate supply, what do you understand by aggregate supply? So aggregate supply is basically all the final goods and services, right? The value of final goods and services that are provided by the producers who are willing to sell those produce at a given price at a given point of time. That's your aggregate supply. So basically the supply of, in simple language, all the goods and services in the economy, correct? Okay, again, if I go back to the circular flow of income, I told you that, you know, whatever is actually in a two sector economy, we know that the total output that we produce, right, the total output produced in a two sector economy is basically distributed among the sectors, correct? And those sectors are basically, you know, your among your households. If we are talking about two sector economy, it's basically households and your firms, correct? So whatever output is produced is distributed among your these two sectors, correct? Now it's basically that, you know, these sectors basically comprises of your factors of production. So it has land, it has labor, it has capital, and it has entrepreneurship, right? And the income that each of these factors of production get is in the form of, I talked about this in circular flow of income. Land is your rent, then your wages, then this is the interest, and these are the profits, correct? So what I'm trying to tell you is this total output generated into the economy, right, is nothing but given to these factors of production in the form of these incomes: rent, wages, interest, and profits, right? So somewhere this total output is equal to these total income generated in the economy, right? So there we come to the concept of your total output is equal to the total income generated in the economy. Okay, and so we can say that this basically your total output is equal to your total income in the economy. Okay, all right. Now this income, okay, if I look at from a household point of view or a firm point of view or anyone's point of view for that matter, it can either be consumed or it can be saved, right? If I look at from that perspective also, so this income can either be consumed or it can be saved. Now if I go back and if I just discuss, if I just relate this to what I have written before, where I say that Y is also equal to your C plus I from the expenditure side, from the aggregate demand point of view, right? So basically what I'm trying to connect, the dots that I'm trying to connect is basically your Y is equal to C plus I from the expenditure side, right? That's your aggregate demand side, and Y is equal to C plus S from your aggregate supply side, okay, or your total output side, or the total output side basically, right? So output, so in both the cases it was equal to the income, and thereby I can say that income can be consumed or be saved. Okay, so we will discuss the relation between these two in my further videos, but right now what I'm just trying to explain is that from the aggregate demand point of view, it can be Y equals C plus I, and so from the total output view, it can also be Y equals C plus S. All right. And then there is one very important diagram where we have this income, or if I so say output level, right? And I have this 45-degree line. Okay, so this is a 45-degree line. Okay, and here is the aggregate demand. Now this 45-degree line basically shows all the points where you have aggregate demand equals the output. Okay, now output is nothing but equals the income and so on and so forth. So I'm not repeating that again and again, but that's what this line shows. So basically any point on this line shows that aggregate demand is equal to the output. Okay. Alright, that's it for this video. So basically I was trying to explain you the aggregate demand, the aggregate supply, and I briefly just introduced in aggregate demand the first two components, consumption and investment, keeping it very, very simple. Okay, and I tried to connect the dots between these two equations, your Y equals C plus I and Y equals C plus S. Right, so these are two important equations. Remember this, we will be using this in our further videos. Okay, till then, thank you, have a good day, take care, bye bye.